Nicholas Alkemade was a rear gunner in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. On the night of March 24, 1944, he occupied the tail turret of a Lancaster bomber flying over Germany. He was 21 years old. The Lancaster was part of Bomber Command's ongoing campaign against German industrial targets. That night, the crew had been assigned to strike Berlin. The aircraft carried a standard bomb load and a crew of 7. Alkemade sat in the most isolated position on the plane, enclosed in a perspex and metal turret at the very end of the fuselage, separated from the rest of the crew by the length of the aircraft. His job was to watch for enemy fighters approaching from behind and to fire the 4 Browning machine guns mounted in his turret if they came within range. The mission proceeded without incident until the bomber was intercepted by a German night fighter near the target area. The attacker opened fire. Cannon rounds tore through the Lancaster's fuselage. One shell struck the wing fuel tank. Fire erupted instantly. Alkemade turned his turret to face inward, intending to retrieve his parachute from its stowage position inside the aircraft. The parachute was not worn during flight because the turret space was too confined. It was kept just inside the fuselage door, within arm's reach under normal circumstances. When he rotated the turret and opened the doors, he saw that the entire interior of the plane was engulfed in flames. The parachute was already burning. There was no way to reach it. There was no way to put it on, even if he could. The fire intensified. The metal around him began to heat. He had seconds to decide. He could stay in the turret and burn to death, or he could jump without a parachute and die on impact. He chose the latter. He believed it would be faster. Alkemade pushed himself out of the turret and fell into the night. The aircraft was flying at 18,000 feet. He did not struggle or flail. He relaxed his body, expecting unconsciousness to come before he hit the ground. He hoped he would not feel the impact. He fell for nearly 3.5 minutes. He struck the tops of pine trees. The branches broke his fall in stages, slowing him with each impact. Beneath the trees was a layer of snow, approximately 18 inches deep, that had accumulated over frozen ground. The snow compressed under the force of his landing, absorbing much of the remaining energy. He came to rest on his back. He did not lose consciousness immediately. He lay still for a moment, aware that he was alive. He moved his fingers, then his arms. He felt pain in his legs and back, but he could move. He sat up. Around him, the forest was silent except for the wind moving through the trees. Above, he could hear the distant sound of aircraft engines. He did not see the Lancaster. It had already crashed. Alkemade assessed his injuries. His right knee was twisted and painful. His back ached. He had burns on his hands and legs from the fire in the aircraft, but they were not severe. He had a minor cut on his head. He was bruised extensively. He was not bleeding heavily. He was not paralyzed. He stood up, testing his weight on each leg. He could walk. He began moving through the forest. He had no clear sense of direction. He knew he was in Germany, behind enemy lines, and that he would likely be captured. He walked for several hours, moving slowly through the snow. At some point near dawn, he encountered a German patrol. He surrendered without resistance. The German soldiers were suspicious. They brought him to a local military post for questioning. Alkemade explained what had happened. He told them he had bailed out of a burning Lancaster without a parachute and survived the fall. The interrogating officer did not believe him. No one survived an 18,000-foot fall without a parachute. The officer accused him of being a spy who had parachuted in and then disposed of his chute to avoid detection. Alkemade insisted on his story. He gave them details about the aircraft, the mission, and the attack. He described the fire and the turret. He explained that his parachute had been destroyed and that he had jumped anyway. The Germans remained unconvinced. They searched the area where he said he had landed. They found the wreckage of the Lancaster. They found the burned remains of his parachute inside the tail section. They found the impact site in the snow, with broken tree branches marking the path of his descent. They measured the distances and angles. Everything matched his account. The German officers documented the case. They issued Alkemade a certificate, signed and stamped, confirming that he had fallen 18,000 feet without a parachute and survived. It was an extraordinary gesture. They recognized that what had happened defied all expectations, and they wanted the event recorded. Alkemade kept that certificate for the rest of his life. He was taken to a prisoner of war camp where he spent the remainder of the war. His injuries healed over time. The knee required attention, but it improved. The burns faded. He regained full mobility. Other prisoners and guards heard his story. Some believed it, others did not. The certificate helped, but even with documentation, the event seemed impossible. The survival of such a fall depends on an alignment of factors that almost never occur together. The human body cannot survive a direct impact with the ground at terminal velocity, which for a falling person is approximately 120 miles per hour. At that speed, the deceleration upon impact is so rapid that internal organs are torn from their connective tissues, bones shatter, and the brain impacts the inside of the skull with lethal force. Death is instantaneous in nearly all cases. Alkemade did not hit the ground at terminal velocity. The trees reduced his speed incrementally. Each branch he struck absorbed a portion of his kinetic energy. Pine. Branches are flexible but strong. They bend before they break, which allows them to absorb impact over a longer duration than a rigid surface. The cumulative effect of passing through multiple layers of branches was a gradual deceleration rather than a sudden stop. The snow provided the final stage of deceleration. Snow compresses under pressure, which extends the time over which the impact force is applied. The longer the duration of impact, the lower the peak force experienced by the body. This principle is the same one that allows airbags and crash mats to save lives. The snow also distributed the force across a larger area of Alkemade's body, reducing the pressure on any single point. The frozen ground beneath the snow was still hard, but by the time Alkemade reached it, his velocity had been reduced to a survivable level. He was also fortunate in the position of his landing. He hit on his back, which allowed the force to be spread across his torso rather than concentrated in his legs or head. A head-first or feet-first impact would likely have been fatal. His relaxed state during the fall may have contributed to his survival. Tensing muscles before impact can increase the likelihood of fractures and torn tissues. A relaxed body is more likely to absorb shock without breaking. Alkemade did not tense because he believed he was going to die. That belief, paradoxically, may have saved him. There are other documented cases of people surviving falls from great heights, though they are exceedingly rare. In most instances, the survivors fell into snow, trees, or water, and even then, many sustained life-threatening injuries. Alkemade's case is unusual because his injuries were relatively minor. He walked away from the impact site under his own power within hours. Most fall survivors require extensive medical intervention and prolonged recovery. The physics of his survival can be explained, but the specific combination of circumstances that allowed it remains extraordinary. A slight change in trajectory, a difference in snow depth, a faster descent through the trees, or a different landing position could have resulted in his death. He fell within a narrow range of conditions that permitted survival. After the war ended, Alkemade returned to England. He resumed civilian life and worked in various jobs, eventually settling into a position at a chemical plant. He married and raised a family. He did not seek publicity for his survival, though the story spread through aviation and military communities. Journalists occasionally contacted him for interviews. He gave them, but he did not embellish the account. He described the event plainly, as it had happened, without adding drama or speculation. He remained in contact with some of his former crewmates who had also survived the war. The rest of the crew aboard the Lancaster that night did not make it out. The pilot and several others were killed when the plane crashed. Alkemade was the only one who escaped, and he did so in the least likely manner imaginable. He lived a long life. He worked, spent time with his family, and engaged in ordinary activities. The fall became a defining event in his history, but it did not define his daily existence. He did not dwell on it constantly. It was something that had happened to him, something he had survived, and he moved forward. In his later years, he reflected on the experience with a measure of detachment. He acknowledged that luck had played a significant role. He did not attribute his survival to divine intervention or personal resilience beyond the immediate decision to jump. He understood that the environmental factors had been decisive. He had fallen into the right place at the right time. That was the extent of it. He died in 1987 at the age of 64. His story remained a subject of interest in aviation history and survival literature. It has been cited in discussions of human limits, probability, and the unpredictability of combat. It has been used in training materials to illustrate the importance of environmental factors in survival scenarios. It has been referenced in studies of impact physics and injury biomechanics. The Lancaster bomber, in which Alkemade served, was one of the most important aircraft of the Second World War. It was designed for long-range night bombing missions over occupied Europe and Germany. It carried heavy bomb loads and required a crew of 7 to operate. The rear gunner's position was critical for defense against night fighters, which often attacked from behind. It was also the most dangerous position on the aircraft. Rear gunners had the highest casualty rate of any crew position in bomber command. Night missions over Germany were conducted in darkness to reduce the effectiveness of anti-aircraft defenses and to avoid daytime fighter interception. The bombers flew in streams, hundreds of aircraft moving toward the same target over the course of several hours. The goal was to overwhelm German defenses and deliver maximum destruction to industrial and military infrastructure. The risks were severe. German night fighters were equipped with radar and could locate bombers in the dark. Anti-aircraft guns, known as flak, filled the sky with explosive shells. Searchlights swept the air, blinding pilots and making aircraft visible to gunners below. Mechanical failures were common. Navigation errors led planes off course. Weather conditions were unpredictable. Crew members understood that each mission carried a significant probability of death. Alkemade flew multiple missions before the night he fell. He had seen planes shot down. He had seen crew members killed. He had experienced close calls. The night of March 24, 1944, was not unusual in terms of danger. It was a standard operation in a brutal campaign. What made it different was not the mission itself, but the outcome of his escape. The broader context of the air war over Europe shaped the circumstances of his fall. The intensity of the bombing campaign meant that thousands of airmen were flying dangerous missions every night. The technology of the time, the tactics employed, and the scale of the conflict created situations in which extraordinary events became statistically possible. Alkemade's survival was one such event. It was improbable, but within a large enough sample of dangerous flights, improbable events occur. The interrogation by German officers after his capture revealed something about the nature of the war at that stage. The Germans were meticulous in documenting his case because they recognized its significance. Despite being enemies, the officers treated the event as a matter of historical record. They understood that what had happened was exceptional and warranted verification. This level of procedural integrity, even in the midst of total war, speaks to a certain professionalism that existed alongside the brutality. The certificate they issued became a unique artifact. It was a formal acknowledgement from an enemy force that Alkemade had survived an impossible fall. It served as proof when others doubted his story. It validated his experience in a way that personal testimony alone could not. The document represented a rare intersection of wartime adversarial relations and shared human recognition of an extraordinary event. Alkemade's time in the prisoner of war camp was relatively uneventful compared to his fall. He followed camp routines, interacted with other prisoners, and waited for the war to end. The camps for Allied airmen were generally run according to the Geneva Conventions, though conditions varied. Food was scarce, and boredom was a constant challenge. Prisoners organized activities, shared stories, and maintained morale as best they could. Alkemade's story provided a source of fascination and debate among his fellow prisoners. The medical treatment he received in the camp was basic but sufficient for his injuries. His knee was examined and treated. The burns were dressed. He was monitored for signs of internal injury, but none manifested. His recovery proceeded without major complications. By the time the war ended and he was repatriated, he had regained most of his physical function. His return to civilian life required adjustment. Many veterans struggled with the transition from wartime service to peacetime normalcy. Alkemade faced the same challenges. He had to find work, rebuild relationships, and integrate back into a society that had changed during the years of conflict. He did so without fanfare. He did not leverage his survival story for personal gain or public attention. He lived quietly. The significance of his survival extends beyond the individual event. It serves as a case study in the limits of human endurance and the role of chance in life or death situations. It demonstrates that survival in extreme circumstances often depends less on personal action and more on environmental factors beyond individual control. It challenges the narrative that survival is purely a matter of willpower or skill. Alkemade did not survive because he was stronger or more determined than others. He survived because the specific conditions of his fall allowed it. This understanding has implications for how we assess risk and survival. It suggests that many factors in dangerous situations are not controllable, and that outcomes can be determined by variables we cannot predict or influence. It also highlights the importance of preparation and decision-making within the range of control. Alkemade's decision to jump, though it seemed suicidal, was based on a rational assessment of his options. Staying in the burning turret guaranteed death. Jumping offered an unknown outcome. He chose the unknown. The story also reflects the nature of war itself. War creates conditions in which ordinary individuals face extraordinary situations. Alkemade was not a trained survivalist or an athlete. He was a young man doing a dangerous job in a dangerous time. The circumstances of war placed him in a position where he had to make an impossible choice, and the chaos of combat created the conditions that allowed his survival. His experience is one of millions of individual stories that collectively define the human cost and complexity of the Second World War. The legacy of his survival is preserved in historical records, in the accounts of those who knew him, and in the continued interest in his story. It has been featured in books, documentaries, and academic studies. It has been used to teach principles of physics, probability, and survival. It has inspired discussions about fate, luck, and resilience. It remains one of the most remarkable survival stories of the war. Nicholas Alkemade's fall from 18,000 feet without a parachute stands as a testament to the unpredictability of life and the narrow margins that separate death from survival. He did not perform a heroic act. He did not overcome insurmountable odds through sheer determination. He fell, and the world around him conspired in his favor. Trees bent and broke, snow compressed. His body landed in a position that distributed force. He walked away. His life after the fall was long and unremarkable in the best sense. He lived, worked, and raised a family. He experienced the ordinary joys and challenges that define most lives. The fall became a footnote, a story to tell, a moment of profound improbability that did not prevent him from continuing forward. He did not let it define him, but he did not forget it either. In the end, his survival speaks to something fundamental about the human experience. We exist in a world where chance plays a role we cannot fully control. We make decisions based on incomplete information. We face situations where all options seem untenable. And sometimes, against all expectation, we survive. Nicholas Alkemade fell through the night sky over Germany, expecting to die, and lived to tell the story. That he did so is a reminder that the boundaries of the possible are wider than we imagine, and that life persists even in the most unlikely circumstances.